You're basing it on emotion.
Right. And
fear. And you're afraid that I'm right. Tell me what you've heard that makes this impossible. And what evidence to support that?
Right.
And what's the evidence to support those claims? Is that just something to say?
No, I'm just saying that's the kind
of thing. If you make a statement, you have to have some evidence to say where the statement came from. You're basically to pay attention to what I'm saying. I'm not interested in doing this.
There is an indefinable, mysterious power that pervades everything.
Beliefs are mercurial things. They direct our lives and choices, moment by moment. They're stowaways to the imagination emporium. Harnessed to hunches, polished with proof. They're like clothing we can't afford. They elevate us, yet they're not ours to keep. We discard them when they no longer serve our needs, or we find out they weren't real at all. They weren't real at all. This story is extraordinary, especially if it's true. And it all started in the desert, just north of Las Vegas.
Contacted say they've never heard of him. He also said he worked as a physicist at Los Alamos National Lab, where he experimented with one of the world's largest particle beam accelerators, a half-mile-long behemoth capable of generating 700 million volts. Los Alamos officials told us they had no records of a Robert Lazar ever working there. They were either mistaken or were lying. A 1982 phone book from the lab lists Lazar right there among the other scientists and technicians. A 1982 clipping from the Los Alamos newspaper profiled Lazar and his interest in jet cars. It too mentioned his employment at the lab as a physicist. We called Los Alamos again. An exasperated official told us he still had no records on Lazar. EG&G, which is where Lazar says he was interviewed for the job at S4, also has no records. It's as if someone has made him disappear.
To Los Alamos from here, it was a 16-hour drive, and Bob had a friend there, and it used to take us like 24 hours to rebuild all these Alpha Pros. There was like 300 of them, and we'd clean them all up and then rewire them and then put the aluminum tape on them, and then we drive back to Las Vegas.
Alpha Pro?
And technicians.
They scan for radiation of the people that go in and work in Los Alamos.
Oh.
And Bob had the contract. So we did that about every 6 weeks. So what we do is we try to, when Bob started to make some money on the photo business and the Alpha Probes, we actually went.
Do you think Los Alamos just hired me out of high school?
When Bob started to make some money on the photo business and the Alpha Probes, we actually went.
Welcome back to Coast. I'm George Knapp, joined by Gene Huff and John Lear, talking about the origins of the Area 51 story, how it all began. Gene, why don't you tell me how you met Bob Lazar?
Back then I was working at a place called National Appraisal Service down on Eastern Avenue in Las Vegas, and Bob owned back then, this was prior to digital cameras and good appraisal software, so real estate appraisals were still typed out, and actual 35-millimeter photos were taped or pasted in the pages of a real estate appraisal, and Bob Lazar owned the photo processing lab that serviced all the residential real estate appraisers in Las Vegas, so he was Bob the photo guy.
Well, this was before he's Bob the UFO guy.
Right. Well, he was still a pretty eclectic fellow. I mean, he'd show up for photo deliveries in a Honda with a jet engine in it, so he wasn't your normal guy. He looked like a scientist and was certainly an interesting guy, even if he owned the photo lab. And not everybody drives a car with a jet engine around Las Vegas, but certainly not in 1985.
And you were sort of instrumental in making the link from Bob to John Lear.
Right. I had seen John on the record with you and was really interested. I mean, John had a lot of UFO history.
We did a show called On the Record, and one of these shows that airs at like 6 o'clock in the morning on a Sunday that nobody watches, and it's a city councilman would be on, and there's John Lear unveiling his his beliefs about UFOs and government cover-ups and things, and all of a sudden the phone's ringing off the hook and people are paying attention and calling me up and, hey, when are you going to have that guy on again? So we had him on again, had him on a third time. It was even a bigger response. And that's sort of how I got hooked on this stuff, is that I thought, gosh, this touches the pulse of the public in a way that I had never been aware of before. I couldn't figure it out. So we thought maybe we would look into this. And in that third show, John Lear hinted that he might know a guy who was working out at Area 51 on recovered alien technology. You remember that show, John?
Yeah. And you called me up that afternoon and said, any ideas on what we can do for an encore? And I said, well, I have a friend that just got canned out there. Maybe he would want to talk. And then you set the whole thing up for that interview.
So through Gene Huff, you meet Bob Lazar. And
yeah, Gene called me and he said, I'd like to get a copy of all your tapes and stuff. And I said, well, I need an appraisal. And so we traded the tapes for the appraisal. And he brought over Bob Lazar to hold the measuring tape. And Gene and I are talking about UFOs, and Bob couldn't have been more disinterested. He was rolling his eyes. I mean, he thought this was all just baloney. He just couldn't believe it. He said, look, I worked at Los Alamos. If there'd have been anything like that, I would have known.
Well, first of all, I had known Bob Lazar that long back then, so we weren't as all buddy as we are.
Hey, can I get a copy of your UFO stuff? And I said, Gene, I'm out of it. My wife's, going nuts. I said, I just dropped everything. He says, well, in case you ever need a appraisal on your house, maybe we could work a deal out. I said, you're an appraiser? And at that time, I needed an appraisal to get a second because it was totally out of money. He said, yeah. I said, oh, well, listen, I'll give you all my stuff if you'll appraise my house. And from that day on, he has always held that against me because he had no idea how big this place was. And he claims he got the short end of the deal. But when he came over, the guy that was holding the measuring tape was Bob Lazar. And so Bob brought over his resume, and I'm talking, he handed it to me. And that's when I saw, the degree from MIT and the degree from Caltech.
Where is it? Show me the alternate reality that you believe that doesn't lock up with my actual reality. I mean, where are those other facts? Just show me what they are. These facts you grabbed together and painted a different story of my life than I did.
Could you reveal some of the professors at MIT and Caltech?
Yeah, if you want. I don't have a list of them here. Dr. Duxler, I think, was one of them, and Hosefield was another.
Hosefield?
Hosefield. Hoshsfield or something along those lines.
They remember you?
Oh yeah, Hosefield I know well.
These were at MIT or Caltech?
Hosefield was at MIT. Duxler was at Caltech. And what evidence to support that?
Right.
And what's the evidence to support those claims? Is that just something to say?
No, I'm just saying that's the kind of thing.
If you make a statement, you have to have some evidence to say where the statement came from. It's your basic
point. He took Huff and a few others to the edge of the Groom Mountains to see the flights for themselves. A total of 5 witnesses on 2 consecutive weeks managed to dodge security patrols long enough to see the strange glowing object lift above the mountains.
It came up above the same mountain. It moved around. It did a step move. It actually went up in the air like this and hovered, then dropped way down. Then it just floated around and cruised around, and then it started coming up the mountain range.
This home videotape was recorded during one of the trips to the Groom Mountains.
Okay. Good luck. No, what? Did you see that move it did? No, I didn't. It went like it kept doing. Well, look how bright it's getting. Look at it now. Okay. Good luck. No, what? Did you see that move it did? No, I didn't. Move it did? No, I didn't. It went like it kept doing. Well, look how bright it's getting. Look at it now. Look. No, I didn't.
I have better things to do than come up with this. I'm not interested in doing this. I don't like being in the public eye. I don't got money for doing this. And quite frankly, I could make up a better lie, but I have no motivation to lie. I don't understand how everybody gets so caught up in the minutia, because you can debate that stuff forever. We can go back before MIT and you can start fighting whether or not and where I lived in high school. That is not going to translate into answering the questions and the things that I've brought into the public eye. That's the important stuff. It almost seems like this is an intentional distraction. You need to pay attention to the bigger picture. If you really want to research all the other stuff, fine, go ahead and do it. But you really need to pay attention to what I'm saying. Because I have better things to do than come up with this. I'm not interested in doing this. I'm not. This makes no sense anywhere but starting piece. A solid cylinder is not even a solid cylinder. It consists of many disks stacked up. And these are fused together to produce that. And all of these steps are necessary to produce a successful triangle that makes fuel. So actually, you know, if you were to look at how this came to be, this would actually be pieces of all these disks that were cut at unusual angles. Now, apparently, if you don't do all this, that doesn't work. So, unfortunately, that's the extent of my knowledge on this. This makes no sense anywhere, but that's what it takes for it to operate. Now, with the alien technology that was present in the craft, it takes that basis, that extra gravitational energy, in a small reactor, amplifies it through the equipment there, directs it through the waveguides and archways into the emitters, and allows it to propel the craft and manipulate the gravity wave for whatever use they want.
How can this be true? I don't believe a word of this. Do you expect people to believe this?
No, I'm not going to change anyone's mind. That's not my intention. I'm just relaying the experience, the job that I went through. It is a fantastic thing. It's a fantastic story.
But it's true.
It's true. These crafts came from another, not just another planet, another solar system entirely, extremely far away. And they're here.
So back to our power source. Inside the reactor, element 115 is bombarded with a proton, which plugs into the nucleus of the 115 atom and becomes element 116, which immediately decays and releases or radiates small amounts of antimatter. The antimatter is released in a vacuum into a tuned tube, which keeps it from reacting with the matter that surrounds it. It is then directed towards the gaseous matter target at the end of the tube. The matter, which in this case is a gas, and the antimatter collide and annihilate, totally converting to energy. The heat from this reaction is converted into electrical energy in a near 100% efficient thermoelectric generator.
Would take place here. If you can just visualize the hydrogen bomb that was set off in the South Pacific and how big it was, that whole thing is contained in that thing.
Because this is 100% pure energy transformation, right?
A scientist killed in the project. What exactly happened there?
Allegedly, obviously, I didn't see this and I don't know it to be fact, but this is what I was told, that I was hired to replace one of a couple people that were killed while working on one of the reactors from one of the crafts. Apparently, they, for whatever reason, cut open an operating reactor, and the device exploded, killing both of them. The scientists that were killed there, allegedly the detonation from the explosion was fairly large. It would have rivaled a small tactical nuke. So it was done at the Nevada test site, and it was to be passed off as an unannounced nuclear test.
46. A test called Tickling the Dragon's Tail went terribly wrong. Louis Slotin's screwdriver slipped when he was separating two hemispheres surrounding a plutonium core. Slotin received a fatal dose of radiation and died 9 days later. Richard Rhodes and health physicist Richard Malenfant talk about Slotin and the lessons learned.
Technical Area 18 is where a young scientist named Louis Slotin accidentally and fatally irradiated himself, conducting a fairly routine experiment shortly after the war.
The accident on May 21st, 1946 occurred in the afternoon. Slotin was designated to become the armorer out at Bikini Able, the tests in the Pacific. His place here was going to be taken by Al Graves. So Al Graves asked for a demonstration of the measurement of the crit. It was a pickup experiment. Slotin perhaps had his thumb in the central hole of the upper beryllium hemishell a little further than it had ever been done before.
Following the accident, Raymer Schreiber, who was one of the 8 people in the room at the time, wrote a memo with several recommendations for how to prevent future accidents.
To a large extent, those recommendations make the basis of nuclear criticality safety to this day.
15 protons in it. It's element 115. Now, depending on the number of neutrons it has, it will still be element 115, but it can be any number of isotopes of it. 115 undoubtedly has, many isotopes of it. We've synthesized 115. We made one isotope. We have a radioactive one. Now they just need to continue on working with it. I mean, they made just a few atoms, but we'll see what other isotopes they come up with. One of them or more is going to be stable, and it will have the exact properties that I said.
Or could we make it? Or does it have to be natural? As you speculated about that.
Well,
before.
it's natural. It'd be difficult to find it. I do not think you can make that synthetically. It's just, it takes too much time. I mean, to make, an ounce of it or even a gram would take a tremendous amount of time because not all the interactions are successful. I mean, you can bang particles together all day long and one may get stuck and then you've got an atom, and how do you contain, this single atom?
You have a particle accelerator?
Yeah, so all you have to do is build a particle accelerator and you can make all the hydride you need.
So how do we get 500 pounds of it? Where'd that come from?
Well, it had to either be synthesized by the extraterrestrials that bought it in the first place, or, maybe there was a location where they came from where, look, this was a naturally occurring material. We know that all the material in the universe, essentially all the atoms of all elements, came from hydrogen. I mean, all you really need is just atoms of hydrogen to make anything. Once they start collecting together large quantities of them, gravity just begins to push them together under their own weight. As long as you have enough hydrogen, that'll continue until they finally crush down and ignite and produce a fusion reaction. And that starts a star. Once the star is burning, it begins to produce helium by fusing, so now you have another new element. Well, this continues on until the star burns out, begins to collapse, and when large enough stars finally do, they crush down, produce supernovas, and then produce a whole host of every element on the periodic chart, far beyond what the numbers we're used to, beyond 115. And maybe some of these, that's where all the gold, all the uranium, every element you have ever come from, including every cell in your body, has come from supernovas. That's the factory that makes elements. So element 115 is stable. And for those familiar with chemistry, we know that elements with higher atomic numbers have shorter and shorter half-lives. However, when you reach a certain point, they call it the island of stability. There is a place, and we've theorized this for a long time, somewhere around 114 to 116, there should be an area in there where the nucleus of the atom is geometrically stable with protons and neutrons, where it no longer decays. It's not radioactive. 115 is, in fact, this element. In fact, it does occur again somewhere around element 247. Of course, we're nowhere near synthesizing that. We can only, predict things like that. But that's where 115 is.
Did they?
If there was a location somewhere else that had bigger stars, multiple stars, that burped out more heavy elements than our local system did, maybe this is common and you can find stable 115 like we mine for gold on, on our planets, or uranium. It just depends. If they were lucky enough to have exotic materials like that, I find that easier to believe than somebody built a machine to manufacture such a difficult material.
So it's sort of like a Rorschach test. Aha, they made 115. He was right. It really does exist. Somebody who doesn't want to believe it says 115 doesn't behave anything like Bob Lazar said. It's sitting around in a pile of 500 pounds or something, right? I mean, it's sort of like that.
What is
right? I mean, it's sort of like that.
What is the
right? You have to. I mean, you just have to start accumulating, whether you believe it or not. And I personally, again, I prefer you don't believe it. Just begin accumulating the facts that you can, you can verify, and really be careful.
Which is why we had to make it.
You made it?
Yeah, we made it.
But isn't that, don't you need big particle accelerators and things?
So that was the one loophole. You can make the material, you can't buy it. So
where's the particle? You have a particle accelerator?
Yeah, so all you have to do is build a particle accelerator and you can make all the hydride you need.
To make, an ounce of it or even a gram would take a tremendous amount of time.
The biggest thing that stands in the way right now is just getting that material inside the tank, that hydride material.
Right.
And the reason you can't is because
it's a weapon material.
But there's nothing dangerous about it.
No, it's
it
just
won't
used
blow
in
up.
A weapon, right?
Well, beryllium's used in a weapon too.
Right.
Like,
how does that compare for safety with the 2,200 pounds per square inch in this hydrogen gas cylinder? First test, knock the top off the gas cylinder.
Oh.
Perhaps that Model A Ford would have... This is your...
And it's a lot safer than gasoline.
Really?
Yeah, these tanks can be shot at with incendiary bullets or cut in half with a chainsaw, and you could throw a match on them. They just smolder like a cigarette. They just smolder like a cigarette.
And what evidence to support that?
Right.
Yeah, and what's the evidence to support those claims? Is that just something to say?
No,
Quite strong and high temperature metal.
Do you think that you were shaken down? To some degree, you're being fucked with.
I don't think they're just fucking with me. I'm convinced there's ulterior motives. I firmly suspect that there's a lot more to it than they're saying, that they're looking for something else.
Now, there is a question about the end of the film. They make it sound as though Bob is going to tell some big secret, and then and then nothing happens, and then he gets his house broken into, and they make a big thing about the FBI searching the house for this element 115, saying that, oh, maybe he secreted away a piece of it. After all these years, suddenly they're going to search his house, which sounds kind of ludicrous. But
it's all bullshit. Terry, that's all bullshit. The FBI was there, or whoever it was, they were interested in the stuff that he supposedly stored there. And it was actually the DEA that gave him the stuff to store. And when the FBI found that stuff, and I forget what chemical it was, they said, what do you think the DEA would think if we told them it was there? And he said, why don't you ask them? They're the ones that put it there.
Okay, that just
but
sounds
it had nothing to do with 115.
All right. Well, you know what? He also says all kinds of agency people were there searching his house. But, it's really interesting to me. He never once mentions the CIA, which makes me think that the CIA are the ones that put this guy, Jeremy Corbell, up to this whole making this documentary.
Been involved in the MJ-12?
Yeah.
Yes.
What happened is MJ-12, whose headquarters is S4 up at Groom Lake, wanted to get some information out. And the MJ personnel the original 12 have all passed away. So they get different people into these positions of MJ 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and taken over. It's degraded, so it's almost political now instead of like it was when Truman originally formed the MJ-12. It turns out that MJ-1, the head of MJ-12, is a guy named Admiral Mike McClellan. He wanted to get some of the information out because he didn't want to. He thought that some of this information should be out in the public. We don't need to keep all this secrecy. So he decided trying to figure out a way to get it to the public. So he knew that I was a blabbermouth and I would tell anything I knew. They investigated Bob Lazar and they knew that he was a genius, but that he had a background such that they could instantly discredit him. They removed all his records from MIT, from Caltech, so he couldn't prove anything. He'd go back to Caltech, and no, I don't see any records here. And, well, I was here. Well, no, you weren't. And he also, up in Reno at one time, he ran a cat house there. I forget what the name of the honeysuckle ranch it was.
1992, things took a bad turn for me and Bob Lazar. Bob comes to me, I was out of Channel 8 working on some private projects. Bob comes to me and says, hey, by the way, I'm involved in this little brothel operation. It's a legal brothel. It's operating in a couple of apartment buildings. I got to know the lady running it, and I'm trying to help her. I put in some security cameras and computer codes and stuff like that. I go, are you kidding me? And he says, oh yeah, by the way, it's on the same street where you live. And my professional life flashes before my eyes. I don't know what to do. I said, I don't believe you, show it to me. And he took me to it, and sure enough, there it is. I told him, look, you've got to shut this down. People want you to crash and burn. You're probably being followed. Come to find out he was being followed by a team from another TV station. They hadn't got onto that yet, but it was only a matter of time. The hooker he was involved with had 2 vice cops who were boyfriends of hers. It was a matter of time. I said, you got to shut this down, get out of this. I'm going to call the cops and tell them about it, and hopefully you get a pass. That was a bad decision. It was a bad decision on my part, because Bob did shut it down, did get out of it. We did tell the cops, but they didn't let it pass. They were afraid we were maybe testing him or something, so they came and arrested him. I mean, you know what? Not a whole lot of people get arrested for pandering in Nevada, and Bob was facing multiple felony counts. And this is kind of a key insight, I think, into his character, is that parole and probation did this big background check on Bob. And if you were a con man, and they were mad at him, they recommended he should do hard time because he's lying to us about his background. If you were a con man telling a story that you made up about flying saucers and being recruited by the Navy and EG&G and all this stuff, that was the time to come clean. But he didn't. He stuck to his guns in that story. And he told the same story to them as he told to me. In the course of the trial proceedings, we got a letter from Congressman Bill Bray, who had tried to help me get records on Lazar. And his office said, you know what, frankly, we have never seen anything like it. We write to the FBI and say, do you know something about this guy? Who wants to know is basically the response. They didn't tell him, we don't have any information on the guy. They said, you have no right to know about it. It's a congressman. So, you know, you can say what you want about Bob and the weaknesses in his story or what school he went to or what he really did or didn't do, but in a lot of ways, he might have been the perfect guy for a program like this. If you wanted to run it up the flagpole and see how the public reacted and then pull the rug out from under it, he was a perfect guy. Scientifically proficient, very knowledgeable, but if you needed to discredit him, you could. I mean, he flew a pirate flag on his house. He loved machine guns. He loved hookers. He liked jet cars. He was a really interesting guy who had troubles in his personal life, and if you wanted to discredit him, you could. And I think in that way, he might have been the most qualified person for that job, which is why I still believe it's possible that he could have really been there.
It was. So they chose him because not only could he probably help them because he was so smart, And as Mac, he's the one that named ununpennium 115. He's the one that told them what that was, and they didn't know when he went there. They didn't know what it was. He was the one that told them that's element 115, and then told them why and how he'd figured it out. But they decided to pick on Bob to go up there to work at S4 because they knew that Bob would tell me instantly, and that I would blab the whole thing. And that was their modus operandi, was to get the information out and gauge what it did to the public, how they accepted it, and then pull back and say, oh, no, it was all a mistake. Bob Lazar is a fraud. He never worked here. He doesn't have any credentials like that. And they could back away and get out of it. So that was what Admiral Mike McClellan came up with, and that's the way they played it. That's why I'm alive today, because Mike McClellan is keeping me alive. When he dies, I'm going to be gone.
So Bob Lazar says that is how it happened, that he was told these things, and then he gave this information to you, and then
He didn't know McClellan engineered this stuff. He just knew that he got a job up there because in the summer of '88, we were talking, a friend, Gene Huff, and I were talking about UFOs, and Bob would say, you guys ought to go see a psychiatrist because there's no such thing. He said, I worked in Los Alamos National Laboratories. I knew everything that was going on. I was a senior physicist there, and I heard nothing about UFOs. So over the next 5 months, that was like in June of '88, over the next 5 months, there was 3 things that we proved to Bob that we may know more than he did about UFOs. And one was the existence of a secret postal stop called Huawei-2, and that was where they kept one of the EBEs.
You must explain to the audience what an EBE is.
Extraterrestrial biological entity.
That's an alien, right. What they call an EBE.
The other thing was the Project Excalibur, which was a rocket that was designed to go into the Earth 1,000 feet and then explode. And we knew about that. And I forget what the third thing was, but Bob called his friends back in Los Alamos to find if anything was like that was real, and they said, yeah, as a matter of fact, it is. And so he thought, well, maybe these guys know what they're talking about. Also, we showed him the Billy Myers tapes, and of course,
it looked like, if anyone's familiar with Billy Myers sightings, very astonishingly similar to that craft. It was a very sleek, thin-looking, flying saucer-shaped craft. Kind of hard to describe without drawing it, but kind of a typical flying saucer shape.
Did you
thought, well, maybe these guys know what they're talking about. Also, we showed him the Billy Myers tapes, and of course, worldwide, he's labeled a fraud, and he wasn't. That was real stuff. But that was one of the government's most important projects, was to discredit Billy Myers, because the pictures were so great, so clear, the movies were so great, so clear, and they couldn't afford to have that happen. They had to discredit Billy Myers. And today, I know good friends that say, oh no, Billy Myers is a fraud. No, he wasn't. He was the real thing.
And can people find information about Billy Myers and see his photographs?
They can see his photographs, they can see his movies, and all they'll hear about is how it was faked. There's so many people. I was thrown off. There's a website called Above Top Secret, and when I got on Above Top Secret, I was so popular there. I think I was number 8 or 9 in the popularity of the whole crowd there. But they started talking about Billy Myers, and I said it was real, and they, like hundreds of thousands of people, oh, you idiot, how could you believe anything like that? And I finally left because I didn't want to put up with that, and I was going to be a part of a website that was going to say that Billy Myers was a fraud. Mm-hmm. So I left ATS and went to different places, and I haven't been back other than I hooked up with Facebook by accident 3 or 4 months ago, and it's a nice place to work. And I'm posting most of those stories because I have a great fan following, if I can just keep my feet on the ground, because I get so many accolades all day long, and to be able to go off and easy to go into outer space and believe, hey, I must be really something here. But I try and keep my feet on the ground and not believe all that stuff, but to thank people for being so nice.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I thought I set the record straight 30 years ago.
Can we ever be made whole if we're not believed? If our life story is challenged by consensus? Most of us are not forced to answer for our past. We could really navigate this moment with a reverence for what came before. But some people are placed under a microscope. Their words, their actions, scrutinized and challenged. And then they're told to quiet the lies. How much can a man take before he submits to the weight and consequence of distrust? Does he fade back into the shadows that formed him? Or does he lash out to carve his words into your flesh? To carve his words into your flesh.
You saw something up there that you think might have been.
I really hate to say stuff that I can't put my hands on and say this is absolutely for sure.
Okay, what did you say?
I walked down the hallway at one time while I was working out there, and there were doors. The doors that go to the hangars, the smaller doors from the corridors, have a 9-inch or 12-inch square window with little wires running through it, just about head level. And as I was walking by, I just glanced in and I noticed, at a quick glance, there were two guys in white lab coats facing me towards the door, and they were looking down and talking to something small with long arms. Now I was just surprised as I walked by, and I only caught a glance, but I don't know what on earth that was.
And so we went out in the back alleyway there, and I said, what? And he said, John, you will never know what it's like to see your first alien. I said, you saw him? He was alive? He said, yep. And he told me the circumstances. And
I looked in the window, and I think these guys had a doll.
What he said there was a door. He said it had a regular square window about 12 inches by 12 inches with the wire going through, and inside he saw the back of the gray standing with the back towards him and talking to two scientists who were looking down like this, and they had their lab coats. And so that was just and the stories go on.
And entered the door there, and for the first time, one of the hangar doors, the one on the end, was open. The bus drove up and we stopped there, and clear as day in the hangar, taking up almost all the hangar, was the disc. Looked like something right out of a science fiction movie. And we stopped, got out, and for the first time I was let in through that door. And as I walked in there, I thought, well, this is the new advanced aircraft we've been working on, and this is why people keep seeing flying saucers, because it's ours, and we've just been testing it, probably for all these years. And when I walked alongside it, I ran my hand on it, and the device exploded. The S4 facility is an area just off the Papoose lake bed, dry lake bed. It consists of 9 hangars. The hangars have sloped doors on them with a sand texture.
What do you make of that? That there might be something at Papoose, or was, or?
Well, according to Bob, that's where the 9 hangarettes are, camouflaged in the side of the mountain.
I'll give you one other thing about S4 and Papoose. There was a guy named Jerry Freeman. He's an archaeologist. And you wouldn't think an archaeologist has anything to do with flying saucers. Jerry Freeman was studying the path of the 49ers. There was a gold rush of 1849 when thousands of people fled west to try to strike it rich. And a lot of them in covered wagons and settlers, and they had a certain paths that they followed. And Jerry Freeman was trying to reconstruct the path that the 49ers had taken, and he thought that they had gone right straight across the Nevada test site, and in fact had been at Papoose Lake. So what he did was, very bold of him, he infiltrated the test site from going west to east and walked all the way across it, dodged security patrols. He would walk in the nighttime and then hide during the day. And he made it all the way across. Let's show the Freeman stuff. He made it all the way across the test site to Papoose Lake. These are pictures that he had set up with an automatic camera. That's Papoose behind him. That's the place where Bob Lazar said he worked. So Freeman, again, walking at night and hiding in the day, gets all the way to Papoose. He finds the evidence he's looking for. The 49ers had carved something into the rocks there. But as he's sitting out there at night, right at Papoose, it's a sad story by the way he died, a doorway opens up. He said he's sitting there and a doorway of light opens up in the middle of the sky, and things come out, people come out, objects come out, and then it closed up again. Now, he's not a flying saucer guy. He walked all the way across the test site, not realizing that that land is still contaminated with all kinds of nuclear fallout. And he died of cancer 2 years after his journey. But anyway, gave a little piece that sort of goes along with what Jim Goodall just said about people coming out of nowhere. Remember, Papoose Lake, where Lazar said there's this facility built in the side of the mountain, there is nothing there officially. Remember, Papoose Lake, where Lazar said there's this facility built in the side of the mountain, there is nothing there officially. The last piece of information is some UFO. Second thing I wanted to convey is how we pursued this story as journalists. I did not go into this as a lark. It wasn't a joke. I approached it as a story, and I knew there were great risks involved in this because of our credibility. Our credibility of the whole station was on the line. If we screwed this up and promoted this guy as some UFO messiah, and it blew up in our face, we might not ever recover. The station's credibility was on the line, and I know it looks preposterous from the get-go, and that many of our competitors wished it was preposterous, but that's not how it's turned out. My friend and colleague Stan Friedman has been outspoken about Area 51 and Bob Lazar. He thinks it's possible. He buys the idea there could be flying saucers out there, but he doesn't buy Lazar, and he's been way out in front. I have to give Stan credit for doing some of the legwork. Unlike a lot of Bob's critics, Stan has gone to MIT and Caltech and looked for Bob Lazar's educational credentials, and he found them lacking. And I applaud him for that. But because that part of Bob's story is weak, Stan has written the whole thing off, which is what a lot of people have done. I don't know how to I've tried to remind Stan about this in person, and I've said it in public a few times, but the important thing is with Lazar is that the information about his educational background was in the very first story that we aired. The very first report that identified him, we said we could not verify his background. And I will confide to you this. I don't believe he ever went to those schools. I don't believe Bob Lazar could get a degree from Caltech or MIT for a very simple reason. At American universities, when you get a degree, an undergraduate degree, you have to take all kinds of core courses in subjects that you may not be interested in. Literature. I cannot possibly imagine, and Anna, you know Bob, I can't imagine Bob Lazar sitting through a class in American Lit or reading poetry or something like that. He'd never stand for it. There is no way in hell that he sat through that stuff to get a degree. So what do we do? What do we do with that? Do we throw out the story? Here's how I rationalize it, is Bob would not be the first person to lie about his educational credentials in order to get a good job. As his friend of a long time, I've given him the opportunity. Bob, look, come clean on this. Let me know about, if it's a lie, come clean on it. Get it behind you. And he's never given me that satisfaction of saying, yeah, it's a lie. He maintains the story. I don't know what the true story is, whether they could make his records disappear. I have found people who said he was at Caltech, who said that they remember him being on the campus, but that's not enough to make the point. As far as I'm concerned, it doesn't matter. I don't care whether Bob Lazar went to Caltech. The fact that he would lie about it is problematic, but I don't think it's a reason to toss out the entire story, because people do lie about their background in order to get a great job. The thing with Bob is he is an interesting guy. I know a lot of people think that he's a fraud, that he never worked out there. For me, the key was always, did he work at Los Alamos National Lab? Because it seemed to me that if he had worked at Los Alamos in a scientific capability on classified projects, then it's conceivable that he would have got hired to work at someplace else.
to
What's
Las
an
Vegas.
alpha probe?
They scan for radiation of the people that go in and work in Los Alamos.
Oh.
For me, the key was always, did he work at Los Alamos National Lab?
Also, we showed him the Billy Myers tapes, and of course,
Because people do lie. Remember, Papoose Lake, where Lazar said there's this facility built in the side of the mountain, there is nothing there officially.